Coming up next on Salina Media Connection, Justin Moore gave a presentation Monday, November 18, 2019, on the effects of social isolation. The presentation was the opening session of the Intersections of Faith and Health Conference, which took place at Salina's Hilton Garden Inn, 3320 South 9th Street. The conference was organized by the United Methodist Health Ministry Fund. Moore is the owner of Double Arrow Metabolism, a healthcare consulting company that advises doctors on public health. The following program lasts about an hour and 15 minutes.
Thank you for taking the time to join us for our second Intersections of Health and Faith Conference. My name is David Jordan. I'm the President and CEO of the United Methodist Health Ministry Fund. This is an exciting conference for us because it really pulls together folks from the faith-based community, from healthcare organizations statewide, and from healthcare provider groups. Our mission is to improve the health and wellness of Kansans at the Health Fund. But to do that, we really need to work across sectors. We know that we can't work just within the walls of our building. And we know the same is true for the Healthy Congregation churches we fund through the Great Plains United Methodist Church. They're doing amazing work through the Healthy Congregations program. We also know it's not true with the rural providers that we work with, the rural hospitals that are working every day to make sure that there's high quality health care in their communities. We know that there needs to be collaboration. Or the community groups that we partner with that are working on issues that are captured by the social determinants of health, early education, access to care, public health, physical activity, healthy eating. So many folks wear so many different hats, so we're excited that all of you are here today to participate with us to build new relationships. It really is an excellent group, and we hope you take new connections, new information, and really new energy back with you to your communities to help. We're going to start things off this morning with a presentation on social isolation from Dr. Justin Moore from Double Arrow Consulting. Dr. Moore left academic medicine earlier this decade and really is focused on this issue of social isolation, but consulting, trying to reduce chronic disease, improve patient experience, and he's really a visionary on this topic, and I think it will set the tone for today, because I think whether or not we're doing advocacy or healthy eating and active living or working on access to care, we need to make sure we're forming important connections and interfacing with each other, and I think that sets the tone. And then afterwards we'll have a opening worship and come together before we go off to breakouts. But we're really excited about the agenda, excited to have you all here. And I also, before we get started, just wanted to thank the team at the United Methodist Health Ministry Fund for all of the hard work they put into organizing this meeting today. I know working with you each and every day. So if we could thank Dashanika Poindexter, the newest member of our team, Christine Dean, who's celebrating 20 years with the Health Fund this year, Jeff Gambler, who's also celebrating 20 years with the Health Fund this year, and Katie Schoenpop for all their hard work in putting this together and partnering with you. Again, many thanks for you coming, and I'm going to turn things over to Dr.
Try. Well, there it is. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the very nice introduction. I've been with this group a couple times in the past, and it's great to be back. So whenever you see someone present on a topic at a conference, you assume that that person knows what he's talking about. This may not be one of those times. The caveats that I have in this talk are that in spite of the highly sociological nature of the topic, I am not a sociologist, I'm not an engineer, I'm not an economist, I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but I do treat patients still, and I myself have been isolated. So I want to tell a couple stories. One is when I was a senior in high school and I was off to college, and my dad sort of desperately wanted me to pledge his old fraternity. And I wasn't sure that I was fraternity material, but I dutifully went off to a couple of parties that were intended to lure or recruit new pledges to the fraternity, and I and I experienced all the accoutrements of a recruitment party. But in spite of being surrounded by hundreds of people that were my age and who presumably had interests that were semi in line with mine, I had never felt so alone in my life. And I'm not sure that I ever have since. Conversely, Donald Hall, who's a famous poet, used to write for the New Yorker, in the last few years of his life, after his wife had died, said that he actually enjoyed the solitude of his life. He and his wife had led a lifestyle that led to a lot of solitude even prior to her death. They spent most of their days apart, usually met for lunch, and they were together in the evenings. So the amount of time alone that he had, even after her death, did not go up dramatically. But he said that in the evenings, solitude lost its soft power and loneliness took over. And he was grateful in the mornings when solitude returned. So, which one of us was lonely and which one of us was socially isolated? So I was clearly not socially isolated, right? I was surrounded in these fraternity parties by hundreds of other people. But I was clearly lonely. I could not find a connection with anyone there that met the expectations that I had. Donald Hall, prior to his death, was clearly socially isolated. And at times, that social isolation led to him being lonely. And so there's a difference between the two, right? Social isolation is strictly the experience of being alone. So no one in this room right now is socially isolated. We're surrounded by dozens of people. Loneliness, on the other hand, is a subjective experience. It's the feeling that your lived experience is not living up to your expectations. So one of you in this room right now may have come on your own. You may not know anyone else here yet. You may not have made that connection. So in spite of not being socially isolated, you may feel lonely right now. And I think a lot of us forget how physical that feeling is, that gnawing sense of instability when we feel lonely, even in a room, even in a crowded room. But from a purely academic standpoint, it may not matter. This differentiation may be slightly pedantic, right? Because both are bad for you. So there are a lot of ways to measure this. If you go out and look objectively at who is socially isolated, or even ask people if they're socially isolated, you find that people who report that, or people who have that finding, are roughly 29% more likely than their peers who are not isolated to die on any given day. Let's call it 30%. If you ask people if they are lonely, or if you apply some instrument to them to decide that they are objectively lonely, you find that on any given day, they are about 26% more likely to die than someone who is not lonely. So let's round it to 30%. If you strictly look at survey data or census data and find people who are living alone, regardless of the loneliness that they report and regardless of the objective measure of social isolation that they may have, they are about 30% more likely than their peers who are not isolated to die on any given day. This is remarkably consistent across studies. To frame this for you guys, this is roughly the excess mortality that we see from smoking 15 cigarettes a day, right? So, to put this into real day-to-day terms, if you took a hypothetical sample of 100 people and waited until half of them had died, there would be 5 more people alive who reported stronger social relationships than people with weaker social relationships. This is extremely powerful in terms of determining or predicting who lives and who dies in our society. And it's not only a big problem in terms of the effect size, it's a big problem in terms of the number of people affected, right? Remember, the smoking rate in this country is now very low. I think the smoking rate in Kansas is something pre-vaping, is something like 14%, right? Nationally, it's under 20%. The lowest smoking rates we've seen in 100 years. On the other hand, there are 55 million Americans that report feeling lonely or socially isolated most of the time. 22% of the population, and 4% of them say that it's a major problem for them. I put the Japanese and UK data up here just to show that this isn't a strictly American problem. The UK, which is sort of our sister country in a lot of ways, has almost identical numbers. And Japan, a place that has a sort of a strange reputation around social norms, actually seems to have a smaller problem than we do, in spite of the fact that we constantly see news coming out of Japan about kids who, play video games until they die, or elderly people who die in their tiny apartment and aren't found for weeks, that kind of thing. In spite of all that, because presumably of some structural things within Japanese society, they actually report far lower rates of social isolation or loneliness than we do. This is a big enough problem worldwide that the World Health Organization now actually includes social support networks as one of its, I think this is their number 6 social determinant of health, how much support do people have from families, friends, and communities. So worldwide, so this is not a uniquely American problem. So it's tempting to think that people who are lonely or who are socially isolated simply go out and commit suicide, right? Their life becomes so sad that they kill themselves. And while I'll show you some disturbing data on suicide here in a minute, for the most part, socially isolated and lonely people don't die of exotic diseases. They die of the same things that kill the rest of us, some combination of mental illness, heart disease, stroke, and cancer. And there are a lot of theories out there for why this may be. My favorite one, because it's kind of the most exotic one, is that there is some change in the bacteria, funguses, and viruses growing on or in us when we are isolated from our peers. Remember that poor David is sitting there exchanging bugs with me as I speak. He's inhaling things that I exhale, I'm inhaling things that he exhales, and it's true for the rest of you as well. You're all trading organisms with one another right now. This is your chance to leave the room and move out of circle and ask if you want. And I don't know of any solid human data on this yet, but it is abundantly clear that if you take a lab animal and isolate it from its fellow rats or fellow mice, it develops differently and develops different diseases than the ones who were not isolated. And that seems to parallel the diversity of organisms growing on its skin, in its mouth, in its stool. So this microbiome is a very sort of hot topic of research across medicine right now. How are we helped or harmed by the bugs growing in us? I don't know that it really holds water in social isolation just yet, but it's an interesting and fun thing to talk about. But I think it's important to say up front that loneliness itself and social isolation itself is not a disease. Medicine has a bad habit of medicalizing things that don't deserve to be medicalized. And I think this may be one of them. Loneliness and social isolation are simply conditions that lead to other diseases. And the ways they do it are complex. You may have heard me speak before about sort of the frequency of data that humans are capable of taking in. Computers make thousands of decisions per second, and humans seem to be able to make about 1 or 2 decisions per second. So the data flowing into us in a modern society vastly outpaces our ability to comprehend it, and that may have something to do with some of the mental illness that we see. But the thing I want to concentrate on in terms of loneliness and social isolation and applying them to your day-to-day life is how they affect your sleep. So, you all probably wake up once or twice a night on a reasonable night's sleep to go to the bathroom, or you check the clock or something else. It's fairly normal. Once or twice a night is fairly normal. What you don't notice are all the times that you wake up that we call micro-awakenings. These are awakenings that happen that don't quite get you to the point of full consciousness. You get out of sleep, but not quite to full consciousness. And we know that as loneliness goes up, the quality of your sleep goes down. But the total number of these micro-awakenings also goes up as you become more and more lonely. Now, how do we square this with what we know about people, or social organisms in general? Well, we know that if you are in a nice, safe, coherent group, the sound of that twig snapping out in the woods behind you, I'm taking this all back a 1,000 years. The sound of that twig snapping in the woods probably doesn't wake you up. But if you are all alone, sleeping all alone in some threatening environment, and that twig snaps, you're awake, right? Because you're living under constant threat, because you don't have the security of that socially cohesive group around you. And that's what we see in sleep studies. The more lonely you are, the more loneliness you report, the higher the number of these micro-awakenings that you have every night. So what does this tell us? It tells us that we are not house cats, right? We are bees. So humans didn't become the dominant species on the planet because we have the sharpest claws or the biggest teeth, or we can jump the highest or run the fastest. We became the dominant species because of our ability to cooperate, right? And when you take that cooperation away, bad things seem to happen to us. So, who are the prototypical lonely and isolated people out there? Well, the data largely supports the things that you probably have in the back of your mind, right? So, the people who report the highest rates of isolation and loneliness tend to be male, and they tend to not only be male, but they tend to have a fairly hyper-masculine worldview that tells them that reaching out for help may not square with their view of themselves as a sturdy lone wolf out there. The risk of loneliness goes up with age. We know that even in the post-World War II culture, there were very high rates of loneliness and isolation in elderly people. They tend to be unemployed, and if they are employed, it's within the gig economy. They are driving an Uber, or they're delivering groceries, or they're doing something else on kind of a gig basis. Chronic illness increases your risk. Being divorced or widowed obviously decreases your risk, and it's seasonal. And the highest rates of loneliness don't occur right now. They are in the summertime. You are most likely to report being lonely in the summertime, not at Christmas. And so, like I said, this hasn't changed a lot over time. What you're looking at here is data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. For the last 20 years or so, they have done periodic surveys to find out how people spend their days. And what you're looking at is the rate of people who report not interacting with a single other human being in the course of a day. So up here at the top, people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, that rate is about stable. So a huge fraction of elderly people report spending the vast majority of most days completely alone. Stable over time, right? If you go back to 1950, you see identical numbers. What's new is that we're seeing the same reports now in people as young as their late 30s. So I think this is where it's not that I'm not concerned about elderly people, I really am. But I think the drift of this social isolation down to younger and younger age groups is the really concerning part of this. And just in case I haven't driven that point home enough yet, Generation Z, those are people between their late teens and early 20s, now report the highest rates of loneliness of any generation. Why is that? It may be biology, right? We have a huge rate of single parenthood now, And single parenthood is a huge risk factor for loneliness. Even though you're surrounded by kids, kids aren't great company, right? And so, I speak from experience. So being surrounded by kids and sort of that feeling that you're less mobile, you can't get out with a house full of kids if you're taking care of them yourself, is a big risk factor for loneliness. So it's this drift downward in age that I find the most concerning. So this is the point where the born internist in me says that we should go into randomized trial data. I can show you what works, what doesn't. You can all go out to your congregation, to your workplace, and make this stuff happen. But I want to digress a little bit and back up. Since we're seeing this downward shift in ages of people who report loneliness, I think it might be worth examining what's fueling that engine. So I no longer have tiny kids in my house. I'm kind of in the preteen, teen category now. But I, like all of you, have had some experience with small children, and I know that the world is a very awesome place to them. I mean that in the most literal terms imaginable. It does not take much to impress a 4-year-old, right? They want to interact with the world directly, and they can be fascinated by a pile of rocks, right? The world is literally an awesome place to live. And it's this attentiveness, their ability to apply a huge amount of intense attention to any small item around them that really seems to separate them from us. And what I intend to point out over the next few slides is that we are losing this ability for awe. Right? So here's a case study. What you see here are the ranges of various generations of people growing up outside of Sheffield, England. So great-grandfather George, I'll point these out just in case they're not very visible. Great-grandfather George here was aged 8 in 1919. He was allowed to walk 6 miles from home. Here's home. He was allowed to walk 6 miles on his own to go fishing in this lake. His son, Jack, was aged 8 in 1950. He was allowed to walk about 1 mile from his home into the woods. Jack's daughter, Vicky, was aged 8 in 1979 and was allowed to walk on her own to the swimming pool about a half mile away. And now Vicky's son, Ed, when he is 8, is allowed to walk to the end of the street, 300 yards. So what have we done here? Oh, sorry. I have to tell my own story first. Because this is all about me. So just to put myself in this same framing, here is where I grew up, in the absolute middle of nowhere, right, south central Kansas. I had friends who lived there, and there. Before I was in kindergarten, so these are all within a couple miles, right? Before I was in kindergarten, I was allowed to walk to any of their houses on my own, unsupervised, right? In the pre-cell phone era, my mom had I had to tell her where I was going, but she had no idea when I arrived or anything else. Now, I live here, decidedly not the middle of nowhere in northwest Wichita. My kids' school is there, the neighborhood swimming pool is there. My daughter's no longer in school there, she's moved on, but my son still is. And both of them ride their bikes to school more than 95% of the time. I mean, it's a very rare day where they don't ride their bikes to school. And I don't want to make my neighbors out to be bad people, but I've had numerous complaints from neighbors that kids riding their bikes to school interrupts the flow of traffic into and out of the parking lot, right? I've had neighbors complain that my kids are riding to school recklessly on streets on a route that crosses no major streets and that has minimal traffic. And I've had a couple of parents tell me that they think that it's just kind of irresponsible that I allow my kids to take this 1 mile bike ride to school. So, this is where I point out that these people are exhibiting signs of fear, right? They are afraid that something is going to happen to their children if their children are out of their view. And this is also the point where I point out that the person who is going to harm your child lives in the same house as your child, and it might even be her, right? Those people between my house and the school are astonishingly unlikely to do anything to my kids. So, suicide is now the second leading cause of death in people under the age of 35. Number one is unintentional accidents, like gunshot wounds and whatnot. And you can see that the rates of homicide have been fairly stable or even declining over time in these age groups. But for the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen a sharp uptick in the rates of suicide in all these people, in these age groups. And of the ones who are being harmed, who are not committing suicide, almost all of them are being harmed or killed by a parent, a friend, or some other family member. These are kids being harmed by strangers down here, right? Steady over time, and such a small number as to be a statistical anomaly. So, this isn't the part where I intend to bring everyone down. I just want to point out that we now live in literally the safest time in human history to be a child. Children have never been safer than they are right now. And in spite of that overwhelmingly safe environment, we keep them within 300 yards of our house. Okay, so not all the news is bad about kids. The teen birth rate is now the lowest that it has ever been as long as we've been measuring it in America. Right? You are less likely to be a pregnant teenage girl now than you were in the early 1800s. Rates of abortion are probably the lowest that they've ever been in this country. And this crosses every ethnic and racial line, right? This applies to girls of every race. And the reasons for this are complex. So we now have greater access to contraception. We have maybe better sex ed in schools. There are lots of things going into this. But the potentially disturbing thing that's leading to this are these statistics. Right now, a senior in high school is less likely to leave the house on any given day than an 8th grader was 10 years ago. Kids are about half as likely to report having gone out on a date as a senior in high school now as their parents were. So what have we done? We have taken this outdoor sort of free-range lifestyle that our kids used to lead, and we've confined them. So understand that federal prisoners are, by law, required to have a minimum of 1 hour of outside time, unstructured outside time per day. The average American child now spends about 13 minutes a day outside of unstructured activity. So we have taken this natural relationship with the outside world, with the world at large, and we have blocked it out of fear. And naturally, kids have taken the path of least resistance, and they now interact with the world through electronic devices. So in 1970, the average age of onset of regular screen use was 4 years. Now it's 4 months. So I want you to pay attention the next time you're at the grocery store and watch moms or dads pushing kids around in shopping carts, and pay attention to how many of those kids are staring at a YouTube video instead of making eye contact with people passing them by. Okay, so if I take us back 20 years, right when the internet was kind of nascent, we were concerned about a digital divide. We were convinced that rich kids were going to have all this access to the internet and be smarter and more knowledgeable than poor kids, because poor kids just wouldn't be able to get the internet outside of the local public library. We were exactly 180 degrees, 100% wrong, right? So because we see exactly the opposite now. It's kids like mine who live in wealthy households with kind of uppity, over-concerned parents that are being blocked from excess screen time, right? Even though 4 hours a day still seems like a lot. It's kids in lower socioeconomic situations that are really getting hammered with electronic time every day. That separates them from the real world. Now, I do not intend to sound judgmental about this. I cannot imagine what it's like to be a single mom or a single dad trying to prepare food for 3 or 4 kids and getting that time to myself to get that done. The iPad is going to make a very good babysitter in that situation, right? So I don't intend for this to be any kind of slam against those people. But it is what it is. Kids in lower socioeconomic situations are clearly at higher risk of having their real life experience replaced by an online experience. And these devices are drug-like. So what you're seeing here is a study looking at performance on the Iowa gambling task, which is a measure of kind of risk-taking behavior around gambling, versus daily social media use. And you see that people that use social media more often are more inclined to take these gambling-type risks. And we think that's because social media acts as sort of a miniature casino in your hand. You go out and you seek this approval from your peers or from other people on the network, and it causes you to do and say things that you might not do otherwise. This is very drug-like behavior, right? The other part of social media in particular that tends to be drug-like is the fact that if you force someone to stop, with forced discontinuation of the activity for some period of time, people tend not to resume. It's just, think of the people that you've worked with that smoke. And once they had quit smoking for a few months, they became kind of afraid to go out to the patio at work because that's where all the smokers were, and they were afraid of the temptation, right? I'll show you some data later on that shows that social media use is very similar to that. If you cut people off for some period of time, they become very unlikely to go back on the platform. And so now the average teenager checks their phone 95 times a day. That accounts for about 9 hours a day, not including talking. Phone culture is essentially dead. We don't really talk on the phone anymore. And so what I've indicated with that red line that you see slashing through the screen, in case it's not too easy to see, is that 2012, roughly, is when we hit 50% smartphone ownership in this country. So nothing magical really happened there. The really big downward trend in the likelihood of getting together with friends and family started maybe 15 years before that. Things were pretty stable up until then. But there seems to have been some acceleration in this trend over time. And so what is it about interacting with the world through a device rather than in person that is inherently damaging to us? Well, my argument is that it violates what Nicholas Christakis calls the social suite. So Christakis is a physician sociologist at Yale who has gone around the world and tried to identify commonalities across urban and rural populations, across developed and less developed populations, about what it is that really drives human interaction. He actually identified 8 things. I've consolidated them down here into my own kind of 4 things that I think encompass all of them, those being love, friendship, cooperation, and teaching. My favorite example of this is if you go to any preschool and watch what happens to the kids when they are given some free time to play on their own. So let's say the kids get 30 minutes of free, unstructured play without a teacher telling them really what to do. Inevitably, you will see a couple kids get together to play a game, and they will spend the next 28 minutes arguing about the rules, right? And then they will actually play the game for 2 minutes. And at the end of that 30 minutes, when they have to put the game away, they are completely happy. That experience was completely satisfying to them because they were engaging in this cooperative teaching with one another, where they were deciding on the rules of what they were about to do. That activity, though, depends on social cues, right? So it depends on tone of voice. What does the person look like? Is he or she making eye contact with you? What's their body language? All of those things are lost through devices, right? So these devices violate this social suite. Those clues to how we ought to interact with one another are missing. So, think about when you were first making your last really good friend. And think about what it took for you to establish intimacy with that person. You met him or her, and you have to take these small risks, right? You have to just sort of incrementally and gradually overshare with one another and see the response that you get back. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. You can say something mean, and then they respond, and you kind of recoil at yourself, and you take another stab at it. It's this very intricate process of establishing intimacy with another person. Now, take that same situation and think about what it would have looked like if you had done it in a stadium full of people. And that stadium full of people, after every sentence that you uttered or after every action that you took, either gave you approval or disapproval. And when they gave you approval, it felt good, right? When they gave you disapproval, it felt very bad. Well, social media companies like to say that their algorithms simply elevate the best content to the top and give people who are saying the best stuff the most views. But we know that that is objectively untrue, right? So on Twitter, if you want to get really, really engaged, if you really want people to pay attention to what you're saying, you don't make moral statements, right? So moral statements get no likes, no retweets. They get no engagement whatsoever. If you really want people to retweet or like what you're saying on Twitter, you make highly emotionally charged statements, right? So you don't say, I am worried about this policy that the president is proposing because we're imprisoning people who don't deserve it, yada, yada, yada. You don't make moral statements. You say, the president is a Nazi, right? And you get retweeted. On Facebook, if you want to get liked or reposted or shared, whatever the terminology is, you don't agree with someone. If you agree with someone in your post, it goes nowhere, right? If you disagree, you get somewhere, but if you disagree indignantly, you really get some traction on the platform, right? So what we've done is we've taken this intimate, intricate process and we've put it out for public display. And the more disagreeable you are, the more indignant you are, the more attention you get. Okay, so what is the real life consequence of this? Again, I've marked 2012. That's when smartphone ownership in this country exceeded 50%. What happened to teenagers at that point? Rates of depressive symptoms among females started to go up very, very rapidly, in parallel with feelings of being left out and lonely. Feelings that had been in decline for decades, right? Feelings of being left out and lonely sharply increased at the point where smartphone ownership exceeded 50%. Now, there are reasons that this affects females more strongly than males, right? I'm treading on thin ice here. But I think we can all recognize that men and women fundamentally interact a little differently, right? right? Women are much more prone to seek out these intimate relationships with their peers, where men are maybe a little more likely to settle their differences, through punches to the nose or whatever. So these platforms are thought to just be inherently more dangerous to females than they are to males. And it seems to be a dose response, right? So if you look at the time that a teenager is spending on social media, these internalizing problems. So internalizing problems are kind of like depressive symptoms. Externalizing problems are going out and spraying graffiti on buildings, right? Internalizing problems go up in this very neat, linear way with more and more time spent on social media. And as a result, in parallel with all these depressive symptoms, suicide risk factors go up. And it goes up in a fairly linear dose-response way. So if you are spending 4 hours a day on an electronic device, you're about 3 times as likely to report a suicidal risk factor as somebody spending an hour or so. Now, watch out for this little dip at the beginning. We're going to talk about that later on. Okay, when you go from no electronic device use at all to an hour a day, there may actually be some benefit. We're going to talk about that later. Okay. This may be a uniquely American problem. So if you look at suicide rates for all these other Western countries, all who have device use that's roughly equivalent to ours, we are the only country out there with maybe this little blip in the Netherlands, but for the most part, we're the only country out there that's seeing a rise in suicidality amongst young people. I would argue, and I think I can back it up with data, I would argue that that's mostly because every other country on this list has a healthcare system that's fairly inexpensive and fairly proactive. They are meant to go out and find sick people and do something about it, right? In our country, we have a tremendously expensive, tremendously reactive healthcare system that may only interact with this person after his first suicide attempt. Okay. So just remember, kids' default network setting is social cognition. Think about what you think about when you're bored. You may be thinking about it right now. You think about yourself, and you think about others, and you think about your relationship to others. And we know that this is true of even newborns, even before they can recognize faces. So if you put a newborn in a functional MRI and interact with them, and then withdraw, within 3 seconds, that newborn starts to light up the same parts of his brain that you light up when you're bored or lonely, right? So this is hardwired into us, that the loss of social activity is painful. All right, so this doesn't obviously just apply to kids. I would argue that we have done the same thing to ourselves. We've largely cut off our own access to the real world and now mediate much of our interaction with the real world through electronic devices. So in 2015, roughly a quarter of men who had never gone to college had not worked a single day in the previous year. 1/4 had not worked one day in the previous year. In 2000, it was less than 10%, right? So we've roughly tripled the number of men who have not worked a single day in the last year over the last 20 years. So that this brings up a lot of questions, right? Why is this happening? But for the points of this talk, what's happening to all that time? They have all this excess time that they didn't have 20 years ago. What's accounted for? Well, roughly 75% of that new excess leisure time is being accounted for by video games. So again, I don't want to paint myself as some kind of judgmental, nitty up here. I understand that video games bring a lot of joy to a lot of people. I happen to be like 2 years too old to have really been exposed to video games as a kid. I barely missed it. Otherwise, I might be playing a video game right now instead of talking to you guys. Who knows? It's a lack of timing for me. But let's pretend for a minute that instead of video games being what is taking up the excess amount of free time, let's pretend that it's recreational narcotic use, right? Because again, when you put people who are really into a game in a functional MRI machine and see which parts of their brains light up when they're withdrawn from that game, it doesn't look a lot different from narcotic withdrawal. And now that we have sort of this cultural shift toward more ubiquitous availability of mind-altering drugs, and I'm not just talking about marijuana here, I'm talking about lots of things that can be ordered off the internet, from antipsychotics all the way through narcotics. This may be a real challenge moving forward, because the worst video games will ever be is today, right? They will only get better from today forward. So my son, and this is not because he's a flawed human, but I think my son's natural history, if left to his own devices, would be in 20 years for him to be sitting on a couch somewhere playing a video game. If I did nothing about it, if I did nothing else to kind of expose him to the rest of the world, this is what he would spend the rest of his life doing. And so now gaming disorder has a diagnosis code, 6C51, right? I don't know the diagnostic criteria, but there it is. You can actually diagnose someone with this. So, the worry is that games are not only replacing work, they're displacing other meaningful relationships that people may have, and keeping young men from starting real lives. But in their defense, in those young men's defense, what are they missing out on? So about a third of Americans report liking their work. About half say that they're so-called sleepworking. They sort of go to work, they're neither engaged nor disengaged, they kind of pass the time, get through the day, go home at night. But about a fifth of Americans report actively hating or even fearing their workplace. 40% feel physically or emotionally isolated. A quarter of employed adults in this country are paid sub-poverty wages. They have a full-time job, but they qualify for food stamps, right? About half of full-time employees in this country qualify for food stamps. And remember, the fastest growing part of the economy, especially in older people, is the gig economy. You're driving Uber, you're delivering groceries, you're doing something, and that never shuts off. I myself work for an online consulting company where I have a contract that says that if I don't respond within 3 hours, I don't get paid, right? They can page me at 1 a.m. Roughly half of existing jobs will be replaced by robots or computers within the next 2 decades, and the most common worksite diagnosis is not back pain, it is depression. So, what are these men really missing out on? They can sit at home and play video games and get something out of that they're not getting from eating al desto at work. Right? So this is, again, it just shows how often we're wrong. So John Maynard Keynes, who's kind of the father of modern economics, saw the potential of automation and technology to reduce us from the huge numbers of hours that people worked back 100 years ago to a potential 15-hour work week. And he said that we would spend all of our time just trying to figure out how to occupy our leisure time. Because to Keynes, work was just a means of material production, right? You came to work in the morning, you made your widgets for 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever the workday was, and you went home at night and you never thought about that job again until 8 o'clock a.m. the next morning. But now we know, in the modern era, that work isn't just producing widgets, it's not just a means of production. It's, for a lot of us, kind of our religion, right? Go to San Francisco for a few days and talk to those guys and tell me what you think their religion is. It's our source of identity, and it may be the only source of community that a lot of us have. If we don't have a workplace to go to, we don't have anyone else to talk to. So there's potentially real harm in depriving people from the opportunity to work. And even for those of us who do work, we now work roughly a 31-hour day because we spend so much of our day doing more than one task. We spend about 12 hours a day managing our consumer internet and media activities on top of the regular work that we're doing. We actually only spend about 5.5 hours a day doing truly isolated work, work-related things, and none of us sleeps enough, right? We average about 6.5 hours of sleep a day. So, why are these men playing video games? They're playing them for social connection, right? So Fortnite is the fastest growing video game on the market. I know from experience that it makes a lot of noise because my son plays it all the time. About 40% of people who play it say that they play it for fun, but a solid 1/3 of people who play it say that they play it for the social connectivity, right? They may not be connecting in person, but they're connecting online, and that's the best they can do. So these games aren't just these guys wasting time. These games are their source of having a tribe, of having a status that's understood by the other players. Nobody cares if you're rich or poor, white or black, male or female, whatever. If you're good at the game, you're good at the game. And so you get a source of identity out of that. So it turns out that this trickles upward, right? So I'm a Gen Xer. Gen Xers are the heaviest users of social media in the world, right? We average about 7 hours a week, and that number goes up 17 minutes a year over year. If you ask someone in my generation where their phone is at night, about 80% of them say that it's either on the nightstand, on the bed, or in my hand. Physicians like to say that the bed is for two things, sex and sleeping. It's hard to do either one of those while you're holding a cell phone. And the cavalry is not coming for us here, right? So we project that the average number of people number of social media platforms per user will roughly double over the next 4 years. And then even in older men, what we kind of started this talk with, we know that they spend most of their time most of their free time interacting, not necessarily with social media, but with television that is geared toward getting the same emotional response out of them that all these social media platforms are. And the more time they spend watching television, the more likely they are to have cognitive decline or dementia. Okay, so we're all becoming more skeptical of profit-driven corporate data mines powered by human misery, right? Just to really drive this home, I promise I will stop beating this dead horse in just a second. The more Facebook you use, whether you measure it by status counts, link counts, or like counts, the less happy you are, right? You're not only less happy, you have a higher body mass index and a higher likelihood of hypertension. Right? The more time you spend on the platform, the less healthy and the less happy you are. Now, we don't know that that's causal. It could be that the sick people are just getting on Facebook more, but the worry is that somehow being on these platforms makes you sick. So why might that be? Well, the sociologists have thrown out a lot of theories about this, but the ones that seem to predominate or kind of build into the surface are the ideas that we don't see real people on these platforms. When you look at Instagram, you're not seeing that person, standing in his underwear making coffee in the morning. You're seeing a stylized ideal of that person. And that negative social comparison leads to some sort of ruminative behavior that causes you to be depressed. Secondly, unlike a book, so reading books tends to make people happy. One of the things that's nice about a book is that it has an ending, right? You flip the last page and it's over. There is more content being put on the internet on any given day than can possibly be consumed. So it's just endless, and that endless scrolling seems to contribute to this feeling of excess wasted time. And then finally, people commit forecasting errors. So you say, I have a 15-minute break here at work, I'm going to feel so much better after I catch up on my email. And in reality, you don't, right? You don't feel better at all after that 15 minutes is up. The people that we call our friends on Facebook are not necessarily our friends in real life. The average number of Facebook friends per user across the platform is 150-ish. When you survey people about how many of those people they could actually call if they were in trouble, it's about 4, right? They think they could call about 4 of those people. If you ask people out of your 150 on average friends on Facebook, how many would you express sympathy toward were they to be in trouble? It's about 14. So once upon a time, so these surveys have been going on long before Facebook or Twitter or anything ever existed. Once upon a time, when you asked people how many real-life friends they could call on in a crisis, the most common answer, the statistical mode, was 5. I have 5 friends that I could call to help me in a crisis. Last year, when the survey was done, the most common answer was 0. The mode number was 0. The most common response to that survey question was, I don't have a single person in real life that I can call on to help me in a crisis. So, in spite of this, social media is worth a lot to us. If you simply add up the amount of time you will spend on Facebook in the next 50 years, it adds up to about $100,000 at minimum wage, right? If you ask people how much it would take to get them to give it up, it's about $50 a month that most people say that they would have to be paid in order to abandon the platform. That's most highly valued amongst elderly people and women. So, again, you all know Harari. Some of you have probably read him. He wrote the book Sapiens, which I highly recommend. He says that, and I'm paraphrasing, once we worship God, then we worship men, now we worship machines. So, I know I'm in danger of turning myself into a total Luddite here. So I want to point out that all these trends existed with other technologies long before smartphones came along, okay? So there is good, compelling evidence that air conditioning led to increased rates of social isolation, right? So once upon a time, if it was hot out, you couldn't be in your horrible, burning hellscape of a house. You had to go out on the porch, and you were forced to interact with other people, right? Air conditioning changed that, and air conditioning caused everybody to move from the upper Midwest into the South, right? That's how it is in Phoenix. Same with attached garages, right? This is my house. I can pull my comfortable little metal box up, open the garage door automatically, pull in, close the door behind me, go inside, and never speak to another human being ever, so long as I live, right? And then we've designed communities that promote social isolation. So there was a time when every street design in America looked like this. It was a grid on top of a grid. Now street designs look like this, right? So we have designed neighborhoods with the express intention of isolating ourselves from our neighbors. So this is not strictly a computer technology problem. In some ways, it's a technology problem. But we've learned over time how to deal with some of these others. We just haven't quite yet cracked the code on device use. All right, so what can we do about any of this? Do we just chalk this up as another phase in human evolution and we do our best to deal with it, or do we do something else? So I think we have kind of 6 domains to take consideration of here as we try to attack this problem as congregations or as organizations. First is how do we induce real-life interactions amongst kids? Well, the simplest, most straightforward thing seems to be to look for opportunities to communicate with children using these so-called advanced analog clues, like Nick Christakis and Sherry Turkle talk about. This means as much face-to-face communication as you can get with kids without even having a device in the room, right? Because even a device in the room has been shown to alter the way we interact with people. So face-to-face is best. If you can't do face-to-face, then Skype. If you can't do Skype, then at least a phone call so they can hear your voice, right? From Turkle and Christakis' perspective, social media, email, text, instant messages do not count as conversations. Kids need to be confronted in real life. We need to combine unstructured play, so let our kids go out and seek real experiences and roll the dice on somebody breaking an arm, right? You've got to take that chance. Let kids go out and seek real experiences with their peers. Sports are okay, but letting the kids go do whatever they want to do is even better. When they're in the house, create sacred spaces to reclaim conversation and nonverbal cues. So in my house, no one is allowed to be on the phone. Well, my kids don't. Shocker, my kids don't have cell phones. But My kids are not allowed to be on the device in the kitchen, in the dining room, or in their bedrooms. And the same rules apply to my wife and I. So when we sit at the dining room table, not that you have to do it the way I do, it's just the way we've chosen to do it. When we're at the dining room table, the only way to communicate is by talking to one another. And this minute, we did this because of Sherry Turkle coming out and saying that the greatest favor that you can do to someone is to put away your phone. I don't know about the greatest favor, I put like kidney transplant up above this somewhere, but it certainly will make people happier and healthier. And we're seeing this trickle out into the general public, right? So there are multiple stand-up comedians, some of whom you guys have probably even seen in the last couple of years, Chris Rock, Kevin Hart, and others, who will not allow a cell phone into their shows. You can go to Intrust Bank Arena in Wichita, seating 15,000 people to see a comedian, and if they catch you with a cell phone, they escort you out the door, right? They provide lockers in the lobby for you to put your phones in. McDonald's is experimenting with the so-called phone off, fun on initiative, and the YMCA has something similar. So what about virtual interactions among kids? Are there things that we can do to alter those that will presumably reduce their risk of being isolated later on? Well, the easiest place to fall back on for me is the American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations that say that any kid 18 months or younger should not use a screen at all unless it is used for live video chat with family and friends. Beyond that, up to about 2 years, avoid solo use of screen time so they can watch screens with another kid. They can have a shared experience with someone else. Beyond that, up to about 5 years, try to limit them to an hour a day. And at age 6 or older, just make sure that their screen time is not affecting their sleep, interaction with friends, or other things. And like Turkle and like Christakis, they say that we ought to set family media-free times and places. Again, I understand the challenges of doing this if you are a single parent trying to take care of a bunch of kids and you can't afford a babysitter or whatever. I understand that I am speaking about this from a very privileged position. But I think from an aspirational standpoint, it's still a good policy to aim for. Teens and young adults, what can we do with real-life interactions? Well, there's data out there that says that we ought to try to reframe happiness not as a personal idea, but as a social idea. So when you go out and survey people in countries worldwide about what it is that makes them happy, Americans are unique in thinking of happiness as a completely personal construct. If you go to Asia or to Russia, they tend to think of happiness as being a measure of the way you interact with your peers, right? So if we can start to alter happiness toward this definition geared towards social engagement, maybe we will get somewhere. You will make yourself happier, and you will make others happier simply by talking to them. So this is probably, this is 5 years old now, but a famous psychologist at the University of Chicago named John Cacioppo did this experiment where he paid people to go on the train in Chicago and either just be themselves, talk or not talk, whatever you want to do, or don't talk to anybody. No matter what you want to do, never talk to anybody. Or talk to everybody, no matter what you want to do. You have to talk to the person sitting next to you. What the people getting paid didn't know was that they weren't actually the subjects of the study, right? The people sitting next to them were the subjects of the study. So after the train ride, some investigator would go up to the people that had been sitting around the person being paid and ask them what they thought of the ride. They thought that about half the people who were talked to by one of the paid subjects would say, I'm glad they talked to me. That was a coin toss. I'm happy this person talked to me on the trip. What they found was that it was basically 100%. So essentially 100% of people who were talked to on the train because someone was being paid to talk to them were happy that it happened. So smiling at someone, as Vivek Murthy says, even making eye contact, is an act of service. So other things you can do on the job or with your employees, synchronize your coffee breaks. Make sure that at least one other person is taking a break with you. We have good studies to show that even in very high-stress situations like hospital floors, this decreases nursing turnover. Request that people leave their phones in their desk during those breaks. Some workplaces have experimented with giving additional breaks every day as long as you promise not to be on electronics during that time. Some places as much as 15 minutes of break time per hour, as long as you go out with someone else and do something that doesn't involve scrolling through your Facebook feed. And try to spend that time outdoors. So if people who spend at least 3 hours a week outdoors are much more likely to report good health and a high level of happiness than people who spend no time outdoors. And if you do it as part of a couple, the relationship becomes even stronger. Remember, we have good studies to show that patients who are immediately post-operative, who can see trees out the window of their hospital room, require fewer narcotic medications than people who are just trapped in the ICU. There's something restorative about nature. And for those who will come at you with these snarky comments that even back in the day, people ignored one another on the train and read the newspaper instead of reading their Twitter feed, remember that these people are all reading the same newspaper, right? So they're still having a shared experience. And they were all watching the same TV shows at night. So they're still having this collective experience that we no longer have. We can now sort of ensconce ourselves in whatever universe that we want. If nothing else, try taking occasional 5-minute gratitude breaks. These can be handwritten notes, these can be calls, they can be in-person visits, but we know that the expression of gratitude makes us much happier than expressing disdain. Avoid the optimization trap. People want to tell you that sitting at home on your couch and having food delivered to you is the best way to do things. That's not true. Go to the grocery store. If you can. If you're disabled, it's fine. I mean, use these services. But if you can get out and go to the grocery store, go to church, go to restaurants, do it. It may be the only social interaction that you get. Virtual interactions among teens. Deactivating social media obviously makes us happier. This is a study where Stanford researchers took very heavy Facebook users and paid them to quit the platform. Those who quit the platform for a month reported dramatically increased well-being, decreased political polarization, and increased time with friends and family. And after they were forced to discontinue their account for a month, a very tiny fraction of them resumed. Right? Again, this is drug-like behavior. Just quitting probably isn't the answer for most of us, though. There's a powerful network effect in all of this. So remember, there seems to be maybe a slight protective effect of your first hour or so of device use every day. So if you're going to use these things, just limit yourself to an hour, and you may actually make yourself healthier by doing it. Stop scrolling through your feed and compose composed messages to friends and family. When you stop just liking things and passively scrolling through things and start directly interacting with people, you get happier. And it's even more powerful among friends and family. Among seniors, we're starting to see the application of technology to fix problems that technology may have caused in the first place. This is a powerful thing where investigators thought that people in this assisted living facility would use Nikki for manual labor. Most of them just wanted him to keep them company. Right? Service is the path out of loneliness. The mortality benefit with volunteering is so large that it may offset all the mortality risk of social isolation. Spending money on ourselves makes us sadder than spending money on other people. And in experiments, forcing people to act equitably makes them happier than acting selfishly. Find a good third place that levels the social playing field and has a playful mood. And then go to church. So this is work from John Gruber at MIT, who found that going to church, especially with co-religionists, living with co-religionists, think of all the little Catholic towns, led to a 9.1% increase in income, decreased welfare participation, decreased odds of divorce, and increased odds of a new marriage. If you're choosing a place to move to, you'll hear about this afternoon, move someplace dense. As the number of intersections per square mile goes up, the risk of all these chronic diseases, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, etc., try to pick a place with an old-fashioned gridded design. That gridded design is associated with far lower rates of obesity, hypertension, and heart disease than either newer radial grid street layouts or newer than that cul-de-sac layouts. The National Health Service has been sending people out to interact with seniors for decades with an improvement in self-reported outcomes. UCLA researchers did the same thing in Appalachia and found that not only did people get happier, but their blood pressure actually went down. So if your church is looking for outreach opportunities, simply visiting seniors at home with no agenda in mind might be a good way to do it. And if all else fails, buy a dog, right? I don't have a dog. My son has this lizard who I actually love a lot. But owning a dog seems to cut your risk of death by about a quarter, presumably because of one, the company the dog keeps, and two, the dog makes you get out of the house, exercise, interact with other people. And for seniors looking to modify their screen time, here are my rules for recalcitrant users. Kill all the notifications on your phone. There are two ways to make my phone make noise, right? My wife can call me, or I can get a page from a company that I work for. Otherwise, my phone is silent, right? Gray out your cell phone screen. It's very easy to do in your settings. Delete all the social media apps on your phone. Go crazy with Facebook, but make yourself go somewhere to do it. Go to a desktop to do it. Unfollow everyone you don't know or haven't talked to in at least a year, or if that seems mean, simply reach out to them. Do not ever like a post. It makes you sad. We know this. Liking posts makes you sad. Seeking likes, going out and trying to get likes from people makes you even sadder, right? So use the platforms for directed, composed communication with your friends. So this is it. Social isolation is a state of being. You don't have people around you. Loneliness is your response to that state of being. Risk factors are diverse. They cross every demographic line that we know of. But it does seem to harm people to be isolated or alone. Volunteering and church engagement may improve quality of life. And intentional engagement, whether that's intentional composed messages to people on social media platforms or whether that's volunteering somewhere, seems to be the easiest additional image. That's all I have. Thanks for listening.
That was a presentation by Justin Moore on the effects of social isolation. You're watching Salina Media Connection.